Imagine being on death row, awaiting your fate, and then, against all odds, you survive. Today we delve into the gripping stories of individuals who lived this reality. This isn't fiction, it's not a movie plot, it's a chilling reality for a select few. We're peeling back the layers on some of the most unique stories of survival against the death penalty. These are tales of individuals who, due to various circumstances, found themselves staring down the barrel of the ultimate punishment. However, through a combination of unforeseen events, errors, or sheer twists of fate, they managed to defy the Grim Reaper. This is not a celebration of their crimes, far from it. It's a dive into the eerie world of death row survivors, a place where suspense, curiosity, and disbelief intertwine. So, settle in and prepare to enter a world where the line between life and death becomes blurred. Join us as we explore these incredible stories of survival, starting with Willie Francis. Willie Francis, a young man from Louisiana, was convicted of murder in 1946. At the tender age of 17, Willie was found guilty for the murder of his employer, a local pharmacist named Andrew Thomas, a crime that, while he initially denied, he later confessed to under duress. Following a trial that was riddled with dubious legal practices and a defense that was virtually non-existent, Willie was sentenced to death by electrocution. A grim fate for a young man who, by all accounts, had been thrust into a situation far beyond his years and understanding. The day of Willie's execution arrived. He was led to the chair, a foreboding contraption known as gruesome Gertie, and strapped in. As the switch was pulled, instead of the swift end typically associated with this form of capital punishment, something extraordinary happened. The chair malfunctioned. Willie writhed and convulsed, but ultimately he survived. The reason for this botched execution? A profound and shocking level of incompetence. The chair had been incorrectly set up by an intoxicated prison guard and a trustee with no experience in the mechanics of electric chairs. As a result of this grave error, Willie was subjected to an unimaginable ordeal, only to come out the other side alive. This unprecedented event stirred a flurry of legal debates and ethical questions. Should a person be subjected to a second execution after surviving the first? Is it a violation of the Constitution's ban on cruel and unusual punishment? The courts, in a decision that still sparks controversy today, ruled in favor of a second execution. Willie's story doesn't end here, but first let's shift our focus to another survivor, Rommel Broom, a man who, like Willie, found himself in the throes of a failed execution. But his story, as we will find out, is a tale of survival against a different kind of death penalty. Rommel Broom, a man from Ohio, was sentenced to death for a crime he committed in 1984. Now, this wasn't just any crime, but a heinous act that shook the community to its core. Rommel was convicted of the abduction, rape, and murder of a 14-year-old girl. His trial was swift, and the jury was unanimous in their decision: a death sentence. But this isn't where our tale ends. In fact, it's where things take an unexpected turn. The year was 2009, a quarter century after Rommel's crime, when he was led into the execution chamber. The method of execution, lethal injection, a cocktail of drugs designed to swiftly and humanely end a life. A method considered foolproof, but not this time. The medical team tried for over 2 hours to find a suitable vein. They poked, they prodded, they even took a break to give Rommel a chance to compose himself. But try as they might, they couldn't find a vein that would hold. The lethal injection had failed, the execution had failed. Rommel Broom survived. Now you may be wondering, how can a lethal injection fail? After all, it's a precise process refined over many years. Well, it all comes down to the veins. In some individuals, especially those with a history of intravenous drug abuse, the veins can be difficult to locate or may collapse when punctured. In Rommel's case, his previous history of drug abuse was a factor that contributed to the unsuccessful lethal injection. The aftermath of this failed execution was a whirlwind of controversy and legal battles. Questions were raised about the humanity of the death penalty, the methods of execution, and what should happen to Rommel, the man who survived his own execution. Rommel's case sparked a series of legal battles, but before we delve into that, let's introduce our next survivor, John Babbacombe Lee. John Babbacombe Lee, famously known as the man they couldn't hang, was convicted of murder in 1884. This moniker was more than just a nickname. It was evidence of a remarkable chain of events that would permanently mark his reputation in criminal history. John Lee was a servant at the Babbacombe Bay House in Devon, England. He was accused of killing his employer, Emma Keyes, in a horrific crime that shocked the local community. The evidence against Lee was circumstantial at best, but he was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. The date of the execution was set for February 23, 1885. The gallows at Exeter Prison were tested thoroughly and found to be in working order. But when the time came to execute Lee, the trapdoor failed to open, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Despite the weight of Lee's body, the mechanism stubbornly refused to function. Each time the trapdoor failed, Lee was taken back to his cell while the gallows were tested again. And each time the trapdoor worked perfectly without him on it. It was as if some invisible hand was intervening, refusing to let the sentence be carried out. After the 3rd failed attempt, the prison officials were at a loss. They had no choice but to return Lee to his cell while they figured out what to do. The Home Secretary eventually commuted Lee's sentence to life imprisonment, deciding that Lee had been punished enough by the psychological torment of facing his own execution 3 times. Lee's story was a sensation. It was splashed across newspapers, debated in the Houses of Parliament, and even inspired a popular song. People couldn't get enough of the man they couldn't hang. Yet, despite the public fascination, the mystery of why the trapdoor failed to open remains unsolved to this day. John's story became a sensation, but let's return to Willie Francis and his continued fight for life. After surviving the electric chair, Willie Francis found himself in the midst of a legal battle. The heart of the argument was the notion of double jeopardy. For the uninitiated, this legal concept prohibits anyone from being prosecuted twice for the same offense. Willie's legal team posited that he had already been executed and a second attempt would violate this principle. Leading the charge was Bertrand de Blanc, a local lawyer and World War II veteran who knew Willie as a boy. De Blanc, unfamiliar with death penalty cases, was nonetheless driven by a sense of justice and fairness. The argument was simple yet profound. Willie had walked the last mile. He had said his final goodbyes. In their eyes, he had paid his debt to society. However, the opposition was formidable. The state argued that the botched execution was due to a mechanical failure, a regrettable mishap, and not a deliberate act of cruelty. They contended that the principle of double jeopardy didn't apply since Willie had survived. The case eventually found its way to the Supreme Court, a first of its kind. The justices were divided, but the majority sided with the state. They ruled that the failure of the electric chair was an accident and retrying Willie wouldn't constitute double jeopardy. Despite the legal setback, Willie's fate was not sealed immediately. The case had drawn national attention, leading to a public outcry and a petition for clemency. Yet despite these efforts, Willie was executed in May 1947, a year after his first date with the electric chair. The controversies surrounding the death penalty are vividly brought to light by Willie's story. It highlights the gray areas in our legal system where technicalities can overshadow humanity. It's a narrative that continues to echo in our collective consciousness, fueling debates on the morality and legality of capital punishment. But let's now return to Rommel Broom. Rommel Broom's survival led to a series of court battles. The failed execution, where the execution team tried for 2 hours to find a suitable vein for the lethal injection, sparked outrage and legal challenges. Rommel's attorney argued that a second attempt to execute him would be cruel and unusual punishment, a direct violation of the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The case was complicated. The state of Ohio argued that the execution was not technically started because the lethal injection was never administered. On the other hand, Broom's defense team contended that the prolonged preparation and unsuccessful attempts to establish an IV line constituted as part of the execution process. This legal battle was not just about Rommel Broom, it was a fight that would set a precedent for future cases. If the courts ruled in Broom's favor, it could mean that any botched execution could potentially save a condemned person from their sentence. The case went all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court, where the justices were divided. After much deliberation, the court ruled in a 4-3 decision that a second execution attempt would not constitute cruel and unusual punishment. The ruling stated that the problems with Broom's execution were due to medical issues, not the method of execution itself. Despite the ruling, Rommel Broom never faced the executioner again. He passed away in 2020 from complications related to COVID-19 while still on death row. His case, however, continues to be a point of reference in debates about the death penalty and the methods used. Romel's story raises questions about the humaneness of execution methods, but what happened to John Babacombe Lee after his multiple escapes from death? Stay tuned as we unravel another tale of survival against the ultimate punishment. John Lee's survival led to his sentence being commuted to life imprisonment. A twist of fate, an unexpected turn of events that led this man from the precipice of death to a life behind bars. John's life after his sentence was quite unlike anything he had ever known. Consider just for a second how different a prison would be from the icy, sterile execution chamber. He was no longer a man condemned to die, but a living, breathing symbol of a system's failure. A system that had tried and failed to take his life. John capitalized on this notoriety as best as he could. He became something of a celebrity within the prison walls. His story had been splashed across the headlines, and he was a living testament to human resilience. He was the man they couldn't kill, the man who had stared death in the face and lived to tell the tale. But life in prison, even with this newfound fame, was not easy. He had to navigate a complex social hierarchy, all while grappling with the reality of his situation. He was still a prisoner, still confined and controlled, but he was alive, and every day was a reminder of his unexpected survival. After many years, John was released. His life on the outside was a far cry from the notoriety he had inside the prison walls. He was no longer the man they couldn't kill, but a man trying to reintegrate into society. He took odd jobs, he tried to blend in, to live a quiet life, but his past was always there, lurking in the shadows. His story had been told and retold, and he could not escape it. And so, John's life became a testament to the unpredictability of the death penalty. He had been sentenced to die, yet he lived. He had been condemned, yet he survived. His life is a sobering reminder of the frailty of a system that controls the means of survival or death. John's story stands as a testament to the unpredictability of the death penalty. These stories, while exceptional, highlight the controversies and debates surrounding the death penalty. In the face of the harshest punishment society can mete out, these individuals found themselves on the precipice of death, only to survive and bear witness to their experiences. Each tale is unique, yet they all share common threads of resilience, hope, and the human will to survive. We started with the story of an execution gone wrong, a terrifying account that demonstrated the possibility of human mistake. As a sobering reminder of the possibility of procedural errors and the excruciating repercussions they can cause, the account of the botched execution followed. Then we delved into the story of the man they couldn't hang, an astonishing testament to human endurance and the unpredictability of life and death. The legal battles that ensued were a testament to the tireless efforts of advocates who fight against what they perceive as a flawed system. In the courtroom, we saw how the battle for justice can be a marathon, not a sprint. We learned that sometimes the scales of justice can tip in favor of those who seemingly had no hope. As we shifted our focus to life after surviving the death penalty, we glimpsed into the survivor's world, a life marked by trauma, resilience, and a second chance that few ever get. These stories are not just about the individuals who lived to tell their tales. They speak to larger issues about the death penalty, its effectiveness, and its humaneness. They question whether it serves as a deterrent or merely perpetuates a cycle of violence. They challenge us to consider the human cost, the potential for mistakes, and the reality of a punishment that can't be undone once carried out. The stories we've heard today show that life can go on despite seemingly insurmountable odds.